Welcome back. And of course, it is always at this time of year in 2024, South Africa decides. We're building up to what is arguably one of the most important elections in our country. And Democratic Alliance leader John Steenhuisen launching his party's election manifesto over the weekend. Supporters converging on the Union buildings in Pretoria to witness what the parties termed a, quote, rescue plan for South Africa. Included in this plan are solutions to load shedding, poverty and unemployment. Let's unpack it further. Bring in Dr Ongama Mtimka, who is a political analyst. Dr Mtimka, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. There's plenty to unpack insofar as the DA's manifesto is concerned, whether it does indeed speak to the majority of South Africans. But let me begin here. Quite an interesting choice of a venue for this manifesto launch.
Good afternoon to you and your viewers, Michelle. Thank you for having me here. I thought that was witty. It does two things. One, it's aspirational as far as the creating a path to union buildings is concerned. Secondly, it creatively escapes the debate about capacity versus non-capacity crowd. So I thought it was an interesting choice of for a venue.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk more about, the space that the DA is in the midst of this election manifesto launch. It arguably scored quite a big victory in the Constitutional Court with that decision around the cadre deployment records of the ANC. In fact, that deadline is at 5 o'clock this afternoon. It was sort of a victorious manifesto launch in many respects, just given that kind of climate.
Absolutely. I think John Steenhuisen made sure that he plays into it by having the crowd participate in a decision about whether or not to grant the ANC an extension. I don't know how much he could stay true to that, decision by the crowd that says don't grant them an extension. But yes, they were buoyed by the outcome, and they made sure that they leverage it during the manifesto launch. Politically, that was the one issue, but also it's facing an interesting challenge where it's facing no less than 3 splinter parties or effective splinter parties by its former senior leaders that are vying for the centrist support base of the DA. Hence, in its messaging, it talks about it's the only party with the size and experience to topple the ANC. I think that's an attempt at making sure that voters are informed about the consequences of choosing a small party, and they are setting themselves apart from the smaller parties by saying they're the only ones who've got the size to challenge the ANC. Obviously, we have a multi-party democracy. Voters are not going to buy that message between choosing whether the size of a party and whether they like a party based on its leaders and its policies. I think it's unfortunately for the DA going to be the latter that counts most for the voters. Look,
and there's going to be a big job to clean up all of that blue glitter from the lawns of the union buildings. But shall we talk about some of the own goals that the DA and particularly its leader has scored over the past while? I mean, pick a date, right? John Steenhuisen's latest utterances around Amapanyaza, the fact that Panyaza Lesufi, or rather not the fact that, the allegation that he makes that Panyaza Lesufi dragged some people out of Shabin and put them in PEP uniforms. I mean, those kinds of things. It talks to someone that is not very much in touch with most South Africans who shop at PEP because it really is affordable. At the start of the school year, that's generally where all of us get our school uniforms. I mean, his response to the uproar from those comments was to say that he also shops at PEP. So, the party has done that often to sort of put its own foot in its mouth, but then not quite to backtrack enough so that it's an apology.
So what's interesting in the history of the DA decampaigning itself is that in previous times, I think in the last 2 elections, minus 21, the decampaigning was not effectively done by the main leader. People can argue that Mmusi Maimane had this, that, and the other to say too, but it was mainly among some, for example, Helen Zille would tweet something, Tony Leon would tweet something, not so frequently, that would get the DA leadership on a corner where they had to defend things. It's interesting this time that it seems like Helen Zille, among others, have decided to actually give John Steenhuisen some space, given, I don't know if it's me who's missing her strong voice in the social media space. And now John Steenhuisen does the decampaigning of himself by himself. And I think that that's what lack of diversity does sometimes, that while there's not that internal sounding board where the leaders are checking one another before they say things like that, those that are explosive.
Yeah, absolutely. And we often talk about the governing party. We talk about ministers being out of touch with the reality of South Africans. John Steenhuisen, I think, with those comments demonstrating the very same thing. But let's take a look at what sorry, let me just reach over my desk, what the manifesto actually says about what the DA is promising. A whole range of things, but including I want to particularly focus on this one, including halving the rate of violent crime. And I'm highlighting this because I think the DA in many respects is using the work that it's done in Cape Town and in the Western Cape as sort of a roadmap of how things will unfold if indeed it were to take the majority, right? And if we focus on this issue of halving the rate of violent crime in the country, the same can't be said for work it's done in Cape Town if we look at the gang violence that continues to escalate year on year.
Absolutely. So a lot of what the party says, this as well as the unemployment target and poverty target, are all aspirational as far as I see things. In the Western Cape, they defend themselves every time this critique is raised about what they have done in the Western Cape by saying that they do not have sufficient powers at a provincial level in order to clamp down on crime. And then they would pity themselves against national government to say, we are thinking of doing one thing, and then Begetsele comes and negotiates with criminals and all of those things. So unfortunately, we are not able to judge them. In fact, they don't want to be judged on this issue of crime based on the fact that it's a national government competency. But I think that if you look at KZN, for example, and this is currently in the social media space, how the police have taken a zero-tolerance stance against gang leaders as often as they find them, and how now the provincial commissioner in KZN is beginning to gain national prominence. And that cannot be said about the stature of the DA. So the point I'm making is that while we accept the limitations they talk about as far as the devolution of powers from national to local government to provincial government, there's enough space for provincial leaders of SAPS to have such an impact that they too could become acknowledged for some of the things that they do. So I'm accepting some and critiquing some in terms of their approach to this. Yeah,
Steenhuisen saying that where the DA governs, 8 out of 10 people have jobs, there's enhanced policing, and they've delivered groundbreaking solutions to load shedding. Some of that may well be true in the Western Cape, but surely the DA is going to get into trouble when we look at other DA-run municipalities. I imagine in Gauteng, particularly in Tshwane, they'll use the excuse of the fact that it is a coalition.
To some degree, South Africans will accept that, and to the most degree, they will not. So, and this is the point that some opposition parties have said, that you no longer can say the story of, which is a very strong aspect of their manifesto, we'll do what we've done in Cape Town, because precisely in the other places where they have been in the leadership, failing to retain coalitions itself is a leadership issue. And then failing to achieve results is yet another leadership issue. So this may be their response, that they are not in government per se, but there's no way they're going to escape. The other thing about the manifesto, Michelle, is interesting that the DA finds itself having to agree with the ANC, but do so creatively. So, for example, around the issue of the social grants, so they say loudly that the ANC wants to create a welfare state and they want to bring about jobs, yet at the same time they're talking about the child support grant, among others, that need to be brought to the level of the food poverty line, which shows that it is accepting some of the mixed economy policies that are advanced by the ANC. And another issue for me, it's how it berates the ANC for race-based policies, and then goes on to say when it comes to power, it's going to do an approach to redress that's based on material disadvantage. What the Democratic Alliance doesn't say is that both affirmative action and BEE are upward mobility policies. They're not poverty policies per se. For poverty, you have the taxation system in South Africa, which is ranked by Oxfam among the best in the world, because it does precisely what the DA says. It's only going to be done when they get into power, of taking from this Robin Hoodian approach of taking from the rich and giving the poor. You pay the rates you pay for taxes. The lower, the general workers are taxed at about 18%, whereas the middle class gets taxed at up to 42%. So there are a lot of other policies. Then you look at municipalities, the whole program around RDP, the whole program around social housing. All of those are aimed at addressing material disadvantage. BEE and affirmative action, however, are about upward mobility. And the DA seems to intentionally miss this so that it could create this impression that those policies are useless.
Dr. Mtimka, let me ask you this as a parting shot. That comment that the DA, that policy or that line in its mandate around social grants, and specifically the child support grant, arguably the issue of social grants is the big advantage that the ANC has always had going into elections, right? Because the opposition party has always said it doesn't want to create a welfare state. I mean, this is a blow for the governing party then, isn't it?
Well, it is, because the ANC has also cunningly created the impression that only they could drive a policy position like that. So I guess it is. Whether or not people are going to believe that the DA is now truthful about their commitment to this policy, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It is election season. I have no doubt that you and I will speak very, very soon in the future as we build up to 2024 South Africa Decides. Political analyst Dr. Ongama Mtimka, great pleasure talking to you this afternoon.